G'day and welcome back to Critical AFL on YouTube, and Happy New Year to everyone wherever you're watching this from. Today we'll be exercising a little bit of cautious optimism as we analyse the early indicators of the AFL under Andrew Dillon and how it's beginning to look like the dark ages of VFL interests under the VFL's fairy godmother Gillon McLachlan may have ended with his tenure. So those of you who have followed our articles before joining YouTube will know that I've been pretty scathing of Gillon McLachlan's time as AFL CEO, specifically because of his tendency to represent VFL interests ahead of a national competition. And as a West Australian-based observer of the sport, this disadvantage to non-Victorian clubs became really unmissable during his period. So before we look ahead to some of the positive early signs from Andrew Dillon, we'll need to start with a quick look at some of the more notable moments that I'm referring to from McLachlan's time as CEO. Gillon McLachlan took over the role of AFL CEO in 2014, replacing his predecessor Andrew Demetrio, who'd recently finalised the expansion of the competition to 18 teams. That was with the inclusion of the Gold Coast Suns and then Greater Western Sydney Giants to the AFL rugby battleground states of Queensland and New South Wales, respectively. Whether these expansion sides never stood a chance or Demetrio's big picture for the expansion sides never followed through, it's not unfair to say that neither of these clubs have gained the traction that they needed to justify their existence. This, however, is probably the least tangible evidence of McLachlan's VFL reign, as the points we'll be looking at are very much anecdotal. Between 2014 and 2023, when Gillon McLachlan was CEO, only one premiership left Victoria. And this one victory was the West Coast Eagles in 2018, which came against such blatant bias that following the win, West Coast coach Adam Simpson at the time used the annual tradition of an audience between the premiership coach and the AFL to confront the AFL on what Caroline Wilson referred to as Vic Centric AFL management. At the time, 2018 was shaping to be the third consecutive year of VFL fairy tale narratives taking over the AFL final series. What began in 2016 as the drought-breaking headline of the Western Bulldogs winning their first grand final in half a century continued with a similar trend for Richmond in 2017, before completely losing any sense of decency in 2018 with the Melbourne Demons. So the Melbourne narrative reached peak insanity during a preliminary final in Perth, when the AFL directly interfered with the home stadium to broadcast Demons fans to the ground on the big screens from Federation Square in Melbourne. The effort was designed to connect the away side with their supporters in an unprecedented attempt to undermine the interstate home ground advantage. While this sentimental act didn't work, with West Coast blowing Melbourne out of the game before they could score their first goal, it went completely unacknowledged by McLachlan and the AFL that the move had directly interfered with the fairness of the competition against an interstate team already disadvantaged by travel burdens. Unfortunately, the damage Gillon McLachlan did to the national competition didn't stop at petty narratives coming out of AFL House. Midway through the 2018 season, McLachlan and the Victorian State Government, with close input from Eddie Maguire, signed an agreement that would bind the AFL Grand Final to the VFL until 2057 at the MCG. So for anybody who hasn't already processed this information, just stop and think about that for a moment. In the modern national AFL era, with 8 teams outside of Victoria, the CEO signed an agreement with Victoria preventing the highest ranked team from hosting an AFL Grand Final in their home state, if they're not Victorian, for almost 40 more years. I think it's safe to say now, without any risk of being defamatory, that Gillon McLachlan's tenure as AFL CEO drew the national competition back to the VFL dark ages. In my personal opinion, of course. So now that we've covered my scathing review of the former CEO and got that out of the way, we can now get to the question of this video. Is the AFL trying to move on from Gillon McLachlan to an even and fairer competition? And I'm pleased to say that all early indications look good. Throughout the 2024 season, we heard the AFL's competitive balance review, a mechanism based on feedback across all 18 sides in the competition to achieve just that. The only risk with this review was that by canvassing all 18 teams, which is only fair, all feedback for evenness is counterbalanced by clubs trying to protect their competitive advantages. In this regard, both West Coast and Fremantle found themselves an unexpectedly vocal ally in Damien Hardwick.
For clubs in Victoria to sit there and say that the 12 business class flight seats help out the teams in Perth is a laughable statement. And, should be named and shamed, to be perfectly honest, because I find it a bit downright disrespectful, to be honest. It is
So that was Damien Hardwick coming out swinging on behalf of Western Australia in response to some of the pushback from VFL clubs trying to protect that advantage that they had. And in a more positive sign that the competitive balance review was more than lip service, minor requests from both WA sides for fixturing appear to have been taken on board looking at the 2025 fixture, while temporary financial agreements between North Melbourne and WA is set to reduce interstate travel for the next 3 years. So while these are only early signs and there's nothing really permanent about that, for a CEO who's only finished his second year at the helm, the signs look positive. And the pace that these signs have come are probably about as fast as any interstate club could ask for. Long term, I believe the biggest wins for evenness that WA sides could possibly hope for would be gaining a third team in WA with that 20th AFL licence, which would immediately shift the travel burden back by an additional 2 games every year, which is kind of a 4-game turnaround when you think about it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be unfair for the fixture to permanently balance more home games to interstate teams and less to Victorian sides to offset the number of away games they still play locally. While this may be unlikely to happen, it is far less outrageous than that 2057 MCG deal, which somehow got signed during the National AFL era. So who knows? Either way, 2025 and beyond is already shaping positively for the national competition. And this video is mostly just a little alert to fans to watch this space, because for the first time in a decade, things do appear to be moving in the right direction. Watch that space. Also, while you're here, please consider subscribing to this YouTube channel, as we only recently expanded to the platform and every new subscriber helps us continue making video content just like this.